And Craig, maybe you can talk a little bit about it's called the Technion Cornell Innovation, right? So tell us a little bit about that. It's trying to promote technology and entrepreneurship at the same time.
Right. So the educational programs, the degree programs that the students undergo when they're on campus, contain, like I said before, contain not only technical courses, the traditional computer science, engineering courses, information sciences, and so on, but also a strong entrepreneurial training procedure. In fact, it's so important that we have people on campus, even though this is a tech campus, we have people on campus who are dedicated to this. We have a fellow called Grad, who's our Chief Entrepreneurial Officer, who used to be the CEO of Twitter, the social media network you're probably all familiar with. Moved from Silicon Valley to New York in order to help us with this. He's in charge of all these activities. It includes formal coursework by people from business schools, but that's the small part of it. The more significant part is hands-on experience, interaction with the various elements of the New York City tech ecosystem, being with venture capitalists, other entrepreneurs, with people working on intellectual property, and all sorts of others who have some sort of dealings with startups and with companies and entrepreneurship in general. The students are also do projects together with companies. They're working on real-world projects, not just theoretical stuff. They're encouraged to invent their own companies. They're imaginary companies, of course. They're not actually going to go out and do this for real, but they build a mini business plan. They pitch it. In other words, they try and convince an imaginary investor to invest, and so on and so forth. So that type of activity is very important. In fact, when we admit the students to the degree programs, we interview them to determine whether they are suitable. Suitable means they have this entrepreneurial DNA. It's very difficult to take somebody who's essentially an engineer and turn him into an entrepreneur if he doesn't have that type of passion or that type of basic skill embedded in his DNA, his or her DNA. So we have an interview process to make sure we're getting the right people. And when they're on campus, they're trained to fine-tune those skills. So when they go out there, they're actually ready to do this stuff.
Now, I'm going to ask the Italians here, does anyone know if something like that exists in Italy? Is there that kind of initiative? Can we get it over there?
Well, I'm not really familiar right now with the university system in Italy, but I know for sure that the presence of private companies in campuses have been ostracized always.
Yeah.
I mean, because there is the idea in Italy that research must be pure, must be totally not connected to business, and if a company gives money, funds the research, there is something wrong, something bad will happen. So there are a few universities that do that. I know, for example, of the engineering schools in Bologna, in Turin, in Milan. They have partnerships with companies, but for sure they don't grow entrepreneurs on the campus.
Bocconi,
yes.
Bocconi is more like finance than tech, right?
Yeah. But I think that they are more like an MBA school,
yeah.
And as such, they do some of the programs that were described here. And I know, because I had some friends that went through that they have partnership, but they have internship. And, some of the students there that end up having some internship.
I think
it's more of the industry university collaboration that Riccardo mentioned. Is not as much as what we're talking about.
Yeah, but we are talking about private universities. Yeah.
Do you think we could get a change in Italy that would allow business to get more involved and start sort of partnerships on campuses, or is this not possible because culturally it's...
I think, the quick answer is I don't know, but I think that there is so little money allocated for research that at some point the only alternative, because there are a lot of bright students, right? And then what happens is graduates
come to America or
right? So at some point, if you want to keep some of the talent in Italy, you're going to have to do that, because there is no other, because the government is putting less and less money, so somebody needs to fund this research.
Next time we'll get the politicians up here, we'll ask them if it can be done.
You won't get an answer.
Well, you brought up Bocconi, and I just wanted to throw in one of the greatest examples of an internet startup in Europe, and actually is from Italy. It's called Gotsman. If you've never heard of it, you should go check it out. It's the CEO, Federico Marchetti, who actually went to Bocconi, and somehow got a couple of $1 million out of a bank in the year 2000, I think it was. And he started, and it's a tremendously successful company called Ukes. And what they do is, initially they started selling the fashion apparel from a place like Armani or Prada. One season later, and Armani and Prada didn't mind that because it would be discounted, but it wouldn't be in the stores, and so it didn't look bad. And after that, they loved him so much that he's doing their own websites. So if you go to an Armani website, Ukes is actually running it. So it's a great example of what can be done. Yes, ma'am?
Yeah, can I add on a couple of things? I met Federico when he was here in New York because he did an MBA at Columbia, and that's where he got the idea of Ukes at Columbia. And then he went back and
But that's money in Italy.
yeah, but money. The first person who gave him money, not 2 million, but just a check of 100,000 euros, was Alessandro's father. Who's a French in New York. There was a long article on the New Yorker a few months ago. If you missed it, it was a great story celebrating Federico Marchetti. And one thing we miss culturally in Italy, for example, is the celebration of these champions
Right.
of entrepreneurship.
Yes.
I mean, it's amazing that these 10 pages of article about Federico Marchetti was on the New Yorker
Yes.
and not
exactly.
on a weekly magazine in Italy.
Now, I want to get back to Craig and Israel. Can you tell us a little bit about the Israeli model and how it might work elsewhere? For those of you who don't know, Israel has a lot of high-tech entrepreneurs, and many of their companies actually trade on the New York Stock Exchange, probably more than Italian companies do, even though it's a much smaller country.
So actually the correct statistic is that Israel has more companies on NASDAQ than the entire European Union. So
That's pretty telling.
I think it's 200.
It's pretty
I don't know the exact numbers, but no, I think it's less than that, but it's more than all the European countries combined. I think it's number 2 after the US, and China is number 3. So yeah, that is a fascinating statistic. What happens with Israeli companies typically is that they start up in Israel, they get this government funding, they get some VC funding, because we have quite an active VC community in Israel as well. But they cannot stay there. There's no market in a small country like Israel, the other side of the world, very isolated. So typically what happens is at some point they move to the US typically, because that's where the big market is, that's where they do their business development, that's where they start their real operations for real. But what happens is that the interesting part is that they keep the R&D operation in Israel. So essentially the company splits into 2 pieces. The R&D operation, which is what it started off with, stays in Israel, and the business and the business development, marketing, sales, and all the rest of it migrates to either to Europe or to the US. And if you look at the successful Israeli companies, they all operate that way. So a very fascinating example is the recent, it's a company called Waze, which you've probably heard of, which does navigation software with GPS for smartphones, which was recently acquired by Google for $1.something billion. It's a small Israeli company. It has about between 50 and 100 employees. So for a company that size to be acquired for that amount of money is pretty spectacular. They were previously courted by Apple, who wanted to acquire them. They turned them down. Then they were courted by Facebook a couple of months ago, who offered them also about $1 billion for the company. They eventually turned that down as well because Facebook wanted them to migrate the entire company to Silicon Valley, and they refused. They wanted to keep the R&D operation in Israel, and because of that, they basically turned down the offer. They eventually got something better, but that was quite a fascinating incident. So typically that's what happens. So many of the Israeli companies, certainly the successful ones, end up in the US. They're either acquired at some point or traded on the NASDAQ, as we talked about before.